Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here. Hi, Angela. Let me figure out how to share my screen, then I'll introduce myself. Let's see. Okay. On a tiny, here we go. On a tiny laptop screen, trying to get my notes and everything is always my challenge. And I also have a hard time, I know I'm not the only one to say this, but have a hard time seeing the chat when I'm full screen sharing. So if there's something that I need to pay attention to, Maddie, please butt in. And likewise, it's been nice to be able to come and go in the last couple of days just to get to know the community. And it seems like everyone is really warm and friendly and willing to jump in and chat. So I also, like the last speaker, really encourage that. It helps me a lot. And there, oh good, the chat's showing up, great. Because I'm really personable and being at home with my children all the time, every day is just a little bit too much for me. I feel like I need more interaction. And so I'm really grateful for the invite from Angela. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my work with design thinking. And as I was thinking about what to present here with you all in this topic, I admit that I am just coming to learn about the Every Learner Network and all of these things, but I've been thinking a lot about designing for equity and inclusion for a really long time in my work. And so for me, I threw out this title, Beyond Design Thinking, and then I was doing some practice runs with my partner, and he was like, well, what exactly are you trying to say? Are you saying that we're transcending beyond thinking and beyond design thinking so that because we need to abandon this paradigm? And, he's asking me all these really difficult questions. And I was like, is that what you think people are wondering about? So I hope that I'll address that a little bit today. But I did want to just be honest and say, I've been thinking about it for about, when did you send me the message, Angela? Friday night, I think. So this is an evolving thought process for me as well. But I think mostly my goal is to share resources that I have been using a lot in the last 2 years in my work, and really building upon design thinking was really meant to be the prompt for that. So with that, I am a librarian. I work at the University of Arizona. This is my brand new, as of January 2020, makerspace called the Catalyst Studios. We opened at the end of January, so we were open for exactly 7 weeks before COVID came along and changed everything. So I have spent, I spent most of the spring semester in mourning and grief over, as many of us did for all sorts of reasons. But really, like, I had just started a new position, was debuting this multi-million-dollar space in the main library as part of this big initiative at the university called the Student Success District. We were the first piece to be completed, and it was just really a huge change for us to kind of close the doors and try to understand what we could do, if anything, to support the community in this time. So I went through all of these different phases, and I'm still in one now, and in which I felt like the work I was doing around supporting makerspace, access to technologies like laser cutters and 3D printers and virtual reality was just so extraneous to what students needed right now. And then on top of that, thinking about racial justice and the tensions around that, what we were trying to do was get laptops in the hands of our students. We were trying to get Wi-Fi hotspots to our students who were on the reservations. There were much more pressing things than, am I allowed to still 3D print my model? Can I play on virtual reality at home now? These things suddenly became very unnecessary in my mind. And I had to do a lot of work to kind of find the place in which I felt like I could still be impactful. So my backstory is that I was a librarian in the public library system for many years. And I programmed media programs for teenagers and then designed a media space learning lab with the MacArthur Foundation and the Institute for Museum and Library Services. And that was all youth-led work. So I would work with youth to design programs. They made videos, they made video games. We did a lot of digital storytelling. I heard some talk about that as I came into the room. Did a lot of that work and then hired teenagers, used my MacArthur money to hire teenagers to design their own space and do all of the research and all of the user interviews. We did design thinking training, and this was in 2012. So since then, I've really incorporated this work into everything I do and was kind of user-centered before we all were talking about that. Not that I was in front of the curve, but like I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of the context of what design thinking was. And I think Angela might remember this, like we all started to find each other across campus, people using design thinking in different ways. But not everyone really was using the same language. And it was hard to connect around what we were doing, which was really human-centered design. And inside of an academic institution, sometimes it was a dirty word, So that's kind of how I came to even feel like I could talk to you all about what design thinking is. And then just quickly on a personal note, because of the nature of this meeting, I really wanted to just put out there that myself, I am half Filipina and half white. And I have moved through this space in different ways. As a librarian, I'm a woman, 90% or more librarians are women. Also 90% or so are white women in librarianship. So, my professional life, I've been moving through these kind of intersectional identities. And this year has been really enlightening for me in terms of people finally talking about people of color and women of color in their experiences in a much more nuanced way. Like my experience is different than a Chinese American librarian or a Black librarian. Everything is a little bit different, but also we were not unified at all as people of color in my field. And I keep saying librarianship because I think while we probably all have a lot in common, I feel very much like an outsider in this group. So I don't want to assume how you all identify professionally. So in my experience as a librarian in academia, this has been true. And I'm realizing as a Filipina, it's very different. I've always identified myself as an Asian American, but the Asian American identity, as many of you probably know, is varied, and people experience very different types of things, particularly different kinds of microaggressions. So that's there. And then the other thing that you might want to know about me is that I have 3 children. We're all at home, all living together, working together all the time. So if you read my bio, it says that I mostly like them still, but we've spent a lot of time together. So, okay, so this presentation, really, I wanted to start here as, and I also wanted to ask you all, how many of you use design thinking or are familiar with design thinking? Just so that I can get a sense of how many people are familiar. I don't want to give too much. Thanks. Familiar? Great. And it's nice to see there's librarians here too. Good. Great. Okay. Okay, so I'll give a short overview. And the whole structure of this is to talk about some tools that I've been using around liberatory design and designing for equity that are related to design thinking. And at the end, they're all in my slides, everything is linked to other resources. So I'm hoping to give an overview, do an exercise together of self-reflection, and then just kind of showcase some of the best thinking that I've been following. So thanks for letting me know where we're all at. That's helpful. Okay, so to start with then, you know, we're all designers, right? Whether we're designing a classroom, whether we're designing one course, whether we're designing one presentation. And so we all also have an impact on equity. And so remembering that as we move forward, of course, is really important. So design thinking came out of the D School, really. Originally, it was the idea of an architect and urban designer named Peter Rao, who eventually became the dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And he wrote a book in 1987 called Design Thinking. But Stanford's D School really popularized this idea and took design thinking out of architecture. And primarily, it's known as this human-centered creative problem-solving toolkit and paradigm that's very iterative and allows us to have participation from across a large group of people and to focus on the users that we're serving. So this was the original kind of steps that design thinking represented. So we have empathy, defining a problem, ideating, coming up with ideas, brainstorming. That's you often see the sticky note imagery, lots and lots of ideas, and then working to prototype some things and try them out. So the whole spirit of it is we can quickly think of things and we can quickly try new things. We can test them out, and then we can go back to the drawing board. Right. So this is very exciting for many of us, and we all started to do this work in different ways. I was, like I said, in the library designing a program, and that's really where I was introduced to this. And one of the core tenets that was really exciting at the beginning for me was thinking about problems in a new way. So we would start to ask ourselves, how might we solve this problem? You know, so it opens up your thinking, and you're not. I like to always use that analogy of like, my shoe is untied and I have my purse on already and my keys out and I'm in the corner and I'm trying to tie my shoe. And that, you know, was kind of how, when you're frantic and you're really overwhelmed by a problem, we're often in that state of mind. And so for me, when I came across design thinking, it was like opening up the possibilities. How might we do something? And it suddenly was so fresh. But there's people who have been criticizing design thinking for a long time. And here's some of the criticisms. And a lot of it was because it was about taking things to market, right? There's a lot of focus on like using design thinking to come up with a quick idea to figure out how marketable was that. And then the other thing was that it was perceived as very linear, right? And if you don't follow these steps, how are you going to actually make it work? So this, I love this image. It comes from the Henry Ford Learning Institute. Jordan Butler, I guess, was the associate director. And so, you know, this really shows us that it was not a linear process, and it actually wasn't meant to be. Many people will say that they never intended it to be perceived that way, but that it's a lot messier. And Jordan Butler said this: social problems are complex, and arriving at clarity in the midst of that complexity is often extremely difficult. To push the boundaries of design and problems, the frameworks used must be sophisticated and nuanced enough to respond. Here, design thinking and doing draw on the strengths of iteration and exploration through making. I just really loved that, and it always reminds me that there is no direct line to problem solving, especially in the work that we're all trying to do. Okay, so then along came, from some of the criticism, this idea that we needed to introduce more reflection and noticing. So some of the D School folks approached the National Equity Project, and they came together and proposed these liberatory design modes to adapt this process. And so, I'm sorry, I'm like looking at the chat and trying to think if I can respond. So I'm not that good at multitasking. We'll get there. Okay, so the liberatory design modes here introduce the ideas of notice and reflect. So you'll see notice in the purple and reflect in the black. And these allow the designers to redesign themselves as equity-centered. We're trying to pay attention to our own identities and be a little bit more self-aware of our own biases. And then also introducing reflection. If we're testing and then going back to the drawing board without really reflecting on what our social context is or what worked and what didn't work, it really expands on the idea of just thinking that we can be an objective person who can empathize with anyone. And so I didn't go deeply into empathy here, but there's a big national conversation around empathy. And I saw, I looked in on the exercise, the asynchronous session on empathy mapping, and you might, if you're new to design thinking, might look at that. Empathy is a really powerful tool. The criticism is that empathy without our own reflection on ourselves and what we bring and the assumptions we make that we can be an objective person that can empathize is really where the criticism lies. So then they redesigned the model like this, and this was really exciting to me because it makes you realize that noticing and reflecting is a huge part of all of these steps. And I realized if you don't know a lot about design thinking, you wouldn't know that that was a problem, but that's a good thing. I think if one were to enter into design thinking now and accept this as the practices, it's a much more robust model, right? And then they took it one step further, and I just saw this recently in the new Liberatory design cards, and I love this. This is my new favorite one, and I think I'll use it moving forward because it actually includes a little bit different language about seeing the whole system, which I think when we're doing DEI work, this is really crucial. And some of the early criticism of design thinking was talking about how we think that we can just make this little prototype of something and pretend that an entire oppressive system is not affecting that work, or that we can do this and it will affect an entire system, even though we just designed a little trinket for market, or, you know. And it also includes this idea of probing. So later on, I'll share with you the Liberatory design cards, and those are really great resources to learn more about each of these phases of design thinking. Okay, so notice and reflect, like I said, were the additions. And what we want to do here, we're going to do an exercise coming up, so I'll just prepare you. But what we're asking is who am I, or who are we if we're working in a group? Who are our users, and how are we respectively situated relative to opportunity and institutional power? What is our situation, and what is our equity challenge? And as they prefaced in their design deck, if we're not aware of the biases we bring into every relationship and context we are designing within, we run the risk of reproducing power dynamics and relationships. So we really want to design with the intention to eliminate oppression. And how can we use these tools to see our context in new ways? Okay, so I decided on purpose to not digitize this exercise. So if you have a piece of paper handy, it would be helpful. If not, you're welcome to type into the chat as well, but you can choose not to share if you don't want to. This is called the Paseo Protocol, and it's adapted from a few different places, but I got it out from the National Equity Project. And I've used this at many different presentations of late, and there's no right answers, but what we're going to do is take about 3 minutes, and you're just going to write down the first 3 things. So one of the things about design thinking is you write things quickly and you don't think about them too much. We really want to get your first reactions. So you're going to do these things. Write down 3 words or phrases that capture some element of your identity. And don't think about it too much. It can be like, I'm a mom, or pick that up, or you're always late, or the things that are very common to you. They don't have to be profound. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean that to happen. Okay. And then you're going to decide which descriptor do you identify most strongly with, and which do others identify you most strongly with. I wish I put a timer in my slides. Sorry. 3 minutes. Okay, does anyone feel like sharing their 3 words? All right, Clea. Communicator, educator, tech support. I identify most with the first 2, maybe in between or both. I feel others identify me with the latter, which I don't love, but I do see that changing during COVID. Thank you. That's great. Do you see it changing during COVID in that people are getting more tech savvy, or that you're okay with being tech support?
I always just kind of want to go beyond tech support. So not just, here's the tools and here's where you click the buttons, but here's why it matters and here's how it helps your students. So just finding ways to weave in more of that teaching and course design language, which previously was something that, was the responsibility of another team, educational designers. But now I'm like, you know what? I think I'm more effective when I try to do both. So it's been a good opportunity.
That's great. Thank you. That's great. Does one other person want to share?
I can share, and I have a question.
Okay, great. I knew.
But, so I put down hockey mom, science nerd, and a visual creator. So I think most people, or I would identify with being visual, like a visual creator. I love to, teach and create things, and everything's very visual to me, and maybe that's how I learn as well. But with the last question, how do others identify you? Most. I think it would depend on the group. My friend group or my kids hockey, they see me as that, right? And my work people see me as something different. My family sees me as something different. So I have a question mark on the last one.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. And I see more people shared in the chat. Thank you so much. This is really great. Okay, so then the second part of this, I'll read them while you all answer the second part. Describe a time when one element of your identity worked to your advantage in any area of your life. And then think of a time when one element of your identity worked to your disadvantage in any area of your life. Thank you so much for that comment, Camille. It's really helpful. I think it's come up in every time that I've done this as well. And so the conversation has often led us to, if other people think that about us, is it part of our identity? And what does that mean? And maybe we don't want that to be true and we reject that, but how much are we doing that to other people too? And is that a limitation of just how we know or don't know one another? You know, some of our networks are really large, and so we only know each other in certain ways, or we think we do, and that's very limiting. But it's always a really big point of contention. And then Clea, when you said, you know, all my things are work related, I think that's also, it's contextually driven. We're here in a work environment, right? And so don't feel too bad that the things you put out there were all work related. But it's hard right now because I was thinking, I'm not working from home. I'm living in my work, you know, some days, weeks like this, and that's no fun, you know? So I think we can forgive ourselves for getting them all mixed into one. Great. Does anyone want to share on video their advantages and disadvantages?
I can go. So I had an advantage. Well, I actually used the terms from the first round. I don't know if I was supposed to do that or not, but
okay.
One of the advantages I said was curiosity. And I have definitely had any sort of like major life change start with just being curious about a question or whether I could discover new things, working with brilliant people with bigger brains than my own, tinkering with other different things. And that's been sort of remarkable when I look back of like, oh, that was just amusing. That turned into like a total amazing shift. And then one of the other words on here, which is sort of rife with symbolism, was being hungry. And the hunger that I constantly have means that I am constantly like over consuming all of these different opportunities that are out there. I'm like always looking for more things, and I fill up my plate even if I don't have room on the plate. It's more than I can consume. I possibly could share some of the things on my plate with other people, but the hunger keeps me going after those other things. So I'm constantly mitigating that. Yeah, I think we all feel like we're over consuming
That's awesome.
in these pandemic times, right? Like Netflix and Zoom meetings. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So thank you. But at the same time, you know, I in response to your invitation, I thought like, is it too much? Is it too much? And then I was like, you know, the opposite was that I was so uninspired. And I was like, something just showed up that you did not expect. What if you just say yes? Maybe you'll be inspired again. So
you were curious.
I was curious. Yeah. I appreciate you. Thank you. Glenna, would you like to hop on and share?
Sure, I'm coming.
Okay, great. Thanks. Hi.
Hi. I have to get back to my notes here. So my identity, the 3 words that I used for my identity, actually I used 4 because I said educator / learner, introvert, and striving. So a time when it worked to my advantage, I chose the word introvert because right now during this pandemic, being an introvert has definitely worked to my advantage. I have been just really happy working from home and connecting with everybody virtually using Zoom and whatever other means we can to connect. But I'm fine not going out and about, having to socially or physically distance from others. So unlike some who I just know have been incredibly anxious, I just haven't been. I've been actually kind of enjoying the distancing anyway. I'm not enjoying the pandemic by any means. I am anxious about that, but it's been kind of nice for me. And then for disadvantage, I used the word I wrote was striving, and it's actually exhausting. It sounds like it could be a good thing, but in my case, how I was thinking about the word is that it's exhausting, that I'm never settled, that wherever I am is not where I want to be. And so I question if I'm ever going to get there. So I think of one of my very favorite Jackson Browne lines, which could just about be any Jackson Browne line, but this particular one is, everywhere I've ever been, I can't help thinking that I'm just a day away from where I want to be. And so that's the other piece of my identity that I have that I've struggled with and haven't turned that around to feel really positive for me.
Thank you so much for sharing. I feel you in so many of those ways. Great. Okay. So this is a really great exercise that I've used in all sorts of different spaces, and it's always been a great way for people to see each other and to start with their own self-reflection, but to start to see each other. So I highly recommend something like that, especially as we try to get people, moving into more equity-centered conversations. So the next part of this presentation is really just to introduce you to some of these inspiring folks who have taken design thinking and really built upon it. And so one of the questions that came out of me doing my practice with my partner, who's just too much of a thinker for me sometimes, but was just him asking, is design thinking itself a paradigm that is problematic? Does it need, does it need to be abandoned or moved on? And it really made me think that design thinking, what I think, and those of you who use it a lot might have something to say about this, but I don't think of it as hegemonic in that the whole point of it is that it can be iterated upon. It's focusing and celebrating iteration. And so I really wanted to just put that out there for everyone to think about, there have been problems with its application, but the very idea that something like this can lend itself to being evolved and iterated upon is one of the things that makes me keep coming back to it. So, Allison, that's awesome. So what my personal story with equity meets design is that I was doing design thinking work with work projects and really wondering but how do you make sure that you have diverse voices in your empathy interviews and among your users, and how are we really just making sure we're not just designing for inequity? And I came across the several Medium articles that the folks who designers came together to make Equity Meets Design put out. And so they made this one article that was in 2017. And then I've been following them ever since. So I just took the course, and Angela, yes, that's the course that I'm taking right now that I sent to you the other day and said, I'm taking this course and I'm finally like crawling out of bed. So Christine Ortiz is amazing. I love her so much. And there's 4 courses. And of course, this is the year when my professional development budget is like really, really tiny. So the first course is free. And then you can take the other 3. I think they're like $400 each. But she also just wrote a book. So I'm getting ahead of myself here. She just wrote a book, and it's out on Google Drive that you can edit and participate in. And she's looking for co-authors because she's just so transparent and so real. And she's like, I just had a baby. I've been working on this book for so long, and I just want to get it out there. And so you can look at the book and read it and give her comments. And there's parts that still need to be written. So thank you, Allison, for putting all those links in. Those are exactly what I wanted to make sure to share with you. So in their first work that they put out, this is really their framework. And the core beliefs are on the left and the design principles are on the right. So if you take the introduction course, you'll go through them. And then there's all these really wonderful exercises and links to other thinkers and resources that are embedded within the course. Really valuable. And I highly recommend it. And here's the link. Here's the links. On there, the slides are linked with live hyperlinks. But these are the 4 courses. So I don't know, Allison, if you've taken any of the other ones, but the Introduction to Equity Meets Design is excellent. And the other ones are queued up for me. But I highly recommend checking them out. Okay, we're all working on a tight PD budget. This is how that goes. Okay, so Liberatory Design, this was the National Equity Project, and then the D School has a K-12 lab. Out of Stanford's D School, they have a particular K-12 lab who, Angela, you brought one of the people to the University of Arizona at some point to speak with us. What was her name?
I didn't. It was in the College of Education. Shelley Goldman came, but yes. I had everybody come out for that.
Right, you rallied us all. Yes, she was right. Excellent. So I think some of those resources were introduced to me then, but I use this. I went to the Netherlands last summer and taught a workshop on this. I've used their materials a lot in teaching. And what I love about them is that they have the liberatory design mindsets and their design modes. And so they just did a Redux in February, and the tool deck is really robust and really worth checking out. The National Equity Project, I just put this in there because they do other work as well about developing leaders. And I really think that their theory of change is robust and interesting. And it's different work than when I first got to know them. So that is also worth checking out. And I like this top part where it's like, the first wave is a more liberated institution, and the second wave is a liberated system. Because again, I'm looking for something that gives me a little bit of hope, because there are times when you're doing this work in these tiny little ecosystems, and it doesn't really feel like you can affect that system's change in these ways. So I'm putting out all these tools to help myself feel like there's something worth showing up to, when we're all isolated at home and doing the little corner of work that we do. And I know that's why we have these meetings to connect with one another, but I really felt like it was helpful for me to see something in a more systematic way. So Creative Reaction Lab, they do some really interesting work as well, and they've shifted over the last year to focus on very particular communities with Black youth and other groups in and around St. Louis. So they're doing some really interesting work, but you'll see like all of these organizations have very similar mission statements, and they're talking about, or statements of intent. So this is not their current mission statement, but this intention is echoed across all of these organizations, that everyone can be a designer, and that we can redesign the world to be more equitable. So they have this field guide, the Equity-Centered Community Design field guide, which is excellent as well. And it diverges a lot from design thinking, but also has really great tools in it. And then the last thing that I was inspired to share and was thinking about this morning when I listened in, I know a lot of folks are thinking about universal design and how can we do more targeted kinds of work and research for different populations. So John A. Powell is at Berkeley, and he runs the Institute of Belonging and Othering, or Othering and Belonging. And he just is an excellent speaker. If you take Christine Ortiz's class, she has some of his materials embedded in there. And again, this idea of taking individuals seriously, but still having a very universal, setting universal goals, but targeting the approaches is really appealing to me, and has a lot in common with the efforts of many folks. So that's been the most inspirational thing that I've read in the last couple of weeks. So I highly encourage you all to check it out. And he has several videos, and on their website, there's a few different easy pieces to digest and get familiar. So, okay. Well, I made it to 12:44. That's so awesome. I didn't expect that to happen. So that is my presentation. This is me. You can contact me on Twitter or via email. And thank you so much for being willing to do those fun exercises.